Conversations with Two Anarchists from Aleppo. First part, Next to the River. The first question is, how did you organize before the beginning of the revolution to start this revolution?
The question indicates that a single united group was behind the earliest demonstrations, while the events were a little more complicated. There were several organizers. Contrary to the Egyptian, Tunisian, and the majority of revolutions, the capital city played a marginal role.
There's a footnote here. From the 17th of December 2010 to the day that Mohammed Bouazizi immolated himself up to the 14th of January 2011, when President Ben Ali left, the uprising, which started in Sidi Bouzid, essentially spread to the southern regions and the central regions, Gafsa, Souss, Gabes, and Kesserine, before moving upwards to the capital of Tunis, embracing Thala, Rugeb, and then Bezertai and Esifix. Apart from the demonstration on the 27th of December, Tunis only really insurged in the week before the fall of the regime, mainly starting from the university and the neighborhood of Itadamen Manel.
All attempts to organize demonstrations in Damascus were a total failure. It was the small, marginalized cities like Daraa, Banya, and later Homs that were the key players in the beginning. Each of those cities had a different story and way of organizing. For Daraa, a tribal, family-centered society, organizing manifestations with thousands of people wasn't difficult in the technical sense. At the meantime, a lot of people, especially those of us living in places where protests were nearly impossible, we were active anonymously on social media, trying to create networks and find a way to break through the regime's security apparatus. If we want to discuss what finally sparked a revolution after 4 decades of state oppression by an authoritarian, totalitarian regime, there were a series of events that took place in a short period of time, following the Tunisian and Egyptian revolutions.
10 days after the first failed attempt to demonstrate, around mid-February, something happened in Damascus. A guy was arrested by traffic police. That's really the first moment when a lot of Syrians demonstrated together seeking for karama, dignity.
Yes, he was arrested and humiliated, and it was for a small matter. It was in the suburbs of Damascus. A lot of people gathered spontaneously and started speaking about it. Well, they actually started shouting for dignity, and they said that Syrian people should not be humiliated by the regime, and so on. And there were many people, actually, by the thousands. So the Minister of Interior actually came to this square, and he started telling people, "This is shameful as a demonstration, what you're doing." And they were like, No, it's not really a demonstration.
We're just kidding.
But it was. A lot of people shared the video, and we all saw for the first time that we can do this. Because there were a lot of failed attempts to make demonstrations. There were a lot of failed attempts to actually stand in solidarity in a square with the Tunisian or the Egyptian revolution. The police would come, even during just a silent vigil in solidarity with the other revolutions, and the cops would come. So this was the turning point, I think, when people saw that we could do this.
We discovered at that point that we can film and we can share this short videos, but for all people, as there were no activists or no special classes inside the society at that time.
In this manifestation, you mean?
Yeah, no special classes or activists in this manifestation. After this manifestation, we started to imagine we were all involved in this.
There were no leaders.
So after that, we lived in a situation where a lot of stories took place which were not filmed by anyone. There was a demonstration in a city far away called Haseka. It is on the border with Turkey. So there were long days of sharing weird hush-hush stories about protests in faraway cities, about small clandestine groups organizing for a big protest. We were waiting for something to happen, We were very sure something would happen in that month. And at the beginning of March, we put another date for our next attempt at a demonstration. It was the 15th of March.
Another call out?
Yeah, with a specific place, a square in Damascus. And there
weren't many people. There were a lot of intellectuals, like former prisoners and political prisoners, and they arrested a lot of people that day. Even the professor?
Taib Tarini.
Yeah, he was I think 70 years old, and he's a philosopher and an ex-political prisoner too, and they arrested him. It was big news that they arrested a lot of people, so they released him in a short period of time. They were very careful at the time as to not add fuel to the already flaming fire. When they saw that a lot of people took interest in the matter, they released the demonstrators 2 or 3 days later. In a normal situation, they would have kept them for at least 5 years or so.
The biggest event happened in Daraa 3 days later, at the 18th of March. 1 week before this big demonstration, the secret police in that city arrested 10 or more children. They arrested them because they wrote "Down with the regime." They wrote a lot of slogans which they picked up from the Egyptian Revolution. So after that, the secret police and the regime wouldn't release them.
At that time, a story spread like fire across Syria. One that I'm not sure ever happened, but I think the fact that it reached all 4 corners of the country says something about the events that were unfolding. The parents of the detained children went to the military security branch in Daraa, and they demanded the release of their children. And the police told them that they wouldn't do it, and that if they, the parents, still needed children, they could send down their wives, and the police could, I don't know if this is true, but I wouldn't be surprised, because this is the
mentality of...
So, the 18th of March, thousands of people in Daraa took to the streets. They weren't demanding the topplings of the regime. There weren't any demands like this. It's more, they were talking about freedom, talking about dignity, and they were talking about reform actually in the structure of the regime. During the first month, we never imagined that we would actually call for... And of course, from the first moment, they started firing live bullets at the demonstrators. It wasn't that at first they didn't know what to do and then they changed. No, they were very direct from the first moment, that they would face demonstrations with fire. They never really questioned if they should do this or not. And I think 11 or 12 people were killed the first day of a big demonstration in Syria.
Actually, the first day there were 4 people killed. After that, the protesters occupied a mosque, a main mosque at the city. And this is what gave me hope, because this society in Daraa city is so religious. But even with this religious mentality, they put leftist songs by an artist called Sami Shaker. He wrote a song immediately after the demonstration. It's called Yahef. وانت ابن بلادي تقتل بولادي وظهرك للعادي وعلي هاجم بالسيف يا حافن يا حاف.
What a shame. What a shame that you are killing your own people that are demanding freedom, and you are responding with fire. And it became very popular very fast, because it directly blamed the regime. Because even at that point, there were a lot of people talking. Well, is it the regime or is it people infiltrating in demonstrations and shooting at people? But yes, he is a very popular leftist artist, and they had no problem with this.
They put him on the speaker of the mosque. It was a revolutionary step. The army surrounded the whole city after 2 days. Actually, the special forces inside the army, known because of their professionalism, the way they use violence.
There's a footnote here. On the 23rd of March, 2011, the occupied mosque got attacked by security forces. An unknown number of people were killed during this attack. Numerous people got injured, and many got arrested later on after being taken in by hospitals. The following weeks, hundreds of raids took place, and hundreds were detained. The 25th of March, a call to a Friday of Dignity brings tens of thousands of people to the streets in Daraa. A statue of Hafez al-Assad gets destroyed during the demonstration. Massive demonstrations took place in the cities close to Daraa, like Jessam, Dal, Inkel, and Sanamain. In this last city, more than 20 people were killed by security forces repressing the demonstration. Thousands of people take to the streets in Homs, Hama, Sarakieb, Jable, Amuda, Banias, Raqqa, Deir Zur, Latakia, Damascus, and Aleppo.
They are very loyal to the regime. It is a battalion which is known for its loyalty to the regime, so they can make sure that no one would defect from the army or anything. Of course, the telephone lines, the internet was cut off in this city, so no one could actually know what was going on. We just got short clips from people. For example, there was one man, and there was a tank coming towards him, and he was filming, and he said, "Come on, kill me, show people what you are doing in my city." There were only short clips, and they were very low quality actually, because no one really had professional cameras and telephones, and so it was the people who were, they were the journalists and the correspondents in that situation for the war on this day. But if you want to talk about how we organized ourselves, then I think you would be more qualified actually to talk about this.
I'm trying to build a background first of all about the media situation. I will stop because it started randomly. We achieved a point when we realized we should start organizing ourselves. We should start something organized. Because all the media channels refused to publish this kind of video. And even Al Jazeera, all of the mainstream media actually. There was only one channel actually called Orient. It belongs to a businessman, a Syrian businessman, who invested his channel in this Syrian revolution for some reason.
Yes, it was actually still based in Damascus when he started showing these videos. So then their office was closed and they opened another one in Dubai to continue. I think their office in Damascus got attacked.
Yes, so after 1 month, there was actually no media coverage. Only this one channel in the social media, YouTube and Facebook. At that time, it was quiet in most of the cities. In Damascus and Aleppo, it was so quiet. There was nothing happening until April, I think. But the third biggest city in Syria, which is called Homs, joined the revolution.
And there was France 24, which was also showing these videos, and BBC. But Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, which are the two main Arabic-speaking or Arabic-based channels, they weren't. But BBC and France 24, I remember that I used to watch them and to see what was going on.
It was short, 2 minutes.
It didn't make the headlines. It was just,
There's something happening in Syria.
If you want to know.
We were so disappointed, especially with Al Jazeera, because they aired an intense coverage of other Arab Spring revolutions. They had 10 hours of Egypt and Tunisia, and they just gave us written breaking news. So the situation is, the most powerful weapon we have is the media. It is the most powerful weapon with which we can face the regime, our cameras. Because for some reason we don't believe we can defeat this system just by going to the streets and nobody knowing about it. We should use these videos to show the whole world and to call the whole world to defend us. Because we know this regime is so violent, it will kill us at any moment. So if we have a media spot, the regime will calculate this as a new situation. It will not go as far with its violence, so we can manage. The first organized group was the media group. Young people cooperated with channels. They made the channels actually on YouTube. And I still remember the first channel, local channel on YouTube, which was called Ugarit. And after that, we got Flash and Sham. These were the local groups based on YouTube. They were organized. They had correspondents everywhere. They collected movies and made it a little bit.
But these were people who organized together and who knew each other already from before the revolution. Or was this something growing in the revolution?
I don't think so, because it was across Syria in different cities. So I think people actually, and it was hard because there was no trust. You had to build the trust because anyone could be an informant of the regime. So it took some time, but in the end they could form a large group of mini correspondents across Syria that could film and edit. They started editing the videos, increasing the quality.
At that moment, we were using Skype, but we were using fake names and closed chat rooms to get to know each other. For example, I was living here in Holmes, in a certain neighborhood, and I had gotten a hold of these videos. So there was something like a platform open called Liberate. We were all involved in this channel, and after we had an alternative platform, like it is a channel, but there was no kind of we know each other as a person. There were no persons actually, only the matter of what we were doing at that time.
You mean that there were no people physically meeting each other? Everything happened through Skype?
For media, at the earlier part of the revolution, yes, there were no physical meetings, except for friends who knew each other, because this has nothing to do with coordination, managing how we were going to coordinate protests on the street. But the first organized phenomenon in Syria was the media group, and after that the creation of a coordination developed. People dealt with each other in the same city, sharing videos, uploading videos on YouTube. After 1 month of doing this work, it had created some kind of trust between this group, so, okay, let's go and meet in this place and talk about how we can. And even when we meet physically, we were still afraid of each other. Not really afraid of each other, afraid really there is someone who presents himself as a revolution guy, but maybe belongs to this regime. We were afraid of the regime, more than we were afraid of each other. So we decided not to share our real information. Everybody knew we were using fake names, nicknames to protect ourselves, and this was not a problem. So everyone was working anonymously, but physically at this stage, especially when we were talking about those cities which don't have a big revolutionary movement, but we're building a big movement inside the city. But when we talk about Daraa, for example, the revolution has already started inside the city, so everyone already knows each other. In Homs, the same situation, and there's a small city called Salamiya, where I came from. It's like a city of atheists, secular city. It joined the revolution from the beginning, and this was something which gave us some hope and power, because there were 10,000 people on the streets in this city with a population of no more than 100,000 people. So we have an impression from this city protesting, and it was a huge number of us at the beginning of the revolution. And besides freedom and dignity, they rise as a
slogan,
secular slogans.
For example?
The religion for God and the nation for all, something like this. It is kind of diplomatic, but it was good. What else about how we organized? We're talking about how the organization developed during the revolution.
So at one moment, the idea grew that there was a need for coordination. Did I understand well what you said? Like at which moment this idea was growing, and why and how this took form? Or is it too fast? Maybe we are not yet at that point.
Okay, there were a lot of local coordination groups, and they made a good job at the beginning of the revolution, and were called
local coordination committees.
Local coordination committees actually does not include the majority of the coordination groups, and they were trying to represent everybody. They put goals and values to protect the revolution from going so radical with religion or sectarianism.
So when did this start to develop, more or less?
It started from April onwards, and they were trying to conjoin all the other coordination groups, virtually or physically, but I don't believe that was something based on values or beliefs. I think it was a political step. For example, this council declares a document which says clearly, the revolution seeking for equality for all people, regardless of religion, gender, nationality, etc. And there were a couple of groups inside the council who agreed on paper, but when it came to actions, they did the opposite. After 3 months, in July, when the violence had risen, something new appeared, which was called
the Syrian Revolution Committees.
These committees were controlled by the Brotherhood movement, not officially, but under the table. This is how the Muslim Brotherhood works.
Syrian Revolution Committees? What was this?
It was the alternative of the local coordination committees. Or, it's not the alternative, it's like competition.
Especially when they started to become weaker and weaker, because the regime arrested a lot of activists from these committees, the local coordination committees. They were starting to shatter. So that gave the opportunity to the other committees to replace the work that had been done by the local coordination committees.
And these committees had good thoughts, good goals, good values, but they didn't give anything new, a new strategy, for example, for how we could resist as a civil movement.
There's a footnote here. Civil movement is the term used by large parts of revolutionary activists in Syria to indicate the popular movement generally outside of the political parties or existing political structures, and unarmed. This term allows to distinguish between the civil movement and the military movement. The military movement will be formed later on, starting from local people who took up arms to defend the demonstrations against security forces. The terms civil movement, peaceful resistance, or civil disobedience do not seem to imply a total rejection of violence, as one often understands in Europe. When Syrian revolutionary activists are using these concepts, they embody wild gatherings, massive demonstrations, sit-ins, as well as riots, attacks with Molotov cocktails, arsons against official buildings, burning barricades. Therefore, the distinction seems to point out the difference between a military approach of revolution and a popular approach of revolution.
After the struggle was becoming more complex, more and more without any solutions, so people were seeking to find another political solution. So it was not just a matter of how the Brotherhood hacked this civil movement. There was a real problem that wasn't solved. So after that, we got this phenomena. I can make a council and invite some friends. You know, we started to be divided between a lot of groups who wanted to be the center of all these groups. But the main view is that we got two councils, the Syrian Revolution Councils and the local coordination. Local councils because they had a good relationship with the main media channels and other international organizations. Let's say they got a good support from a couple of factors. In July, politicians started organizing as well. The individual politicians organized, and what happened next?
Yes, the Syrian National Council, I think is how it is called.
The one that was outside of Syria?
It is inside and outside.
Like the official representation?
And this is very important, because why do people choose to trust politicians instead of trusting the councils which were created during the revolution? People immediately started to be so motivated about waiting. What's this guy going to do? And who is this politician? Most of them were educated, highly educated. The discussions in the revolution were about them and how they would make a solution for the whole situation, not what we will make. Our mission at that moment was to go onto the streets and to do the same thing as we did before, to go to the streets and say freedom, freedom, get killed and go again, to come with bodies. I don't know how to say funeral, funeral, funeral.
We were stuck in a vicious circle, kind of. And the reason why people trusted so many councils, so many groups over and over again, was because they were looking for a way to get out of this circle, because we were really stuck. Well, first of all, we don't have any experience, any civil disobedience experience, any political experience in order to have the tools to inflict change. So what we saw from other Arab revolutions, we did the same thing. But the thing is that the regime we have is very different. It wasn't going to wait, you know. These people seem very determined to change the regime, so I'll just leave. No, it wasn't like this. We were faced with violence over and over again, and it was actually increasing, not decreasing with time. So we felt like we were doing the same things, and we weren't getting any results. So every time when a group, or especially when politicians, came into the scene, people felt like, these are political prisoners, ex-political prisoners, and they have a political record, so maybe they know what to do. Because these councils and these civil groups that are being formed don't really have a solution for what is going on. So this is really, people started to lose hope, I think, at that time. So they became more willing to put their destiny into the hands of others, no matter who these persons were.
At the same time, we developed good skills with media, with filming. So for example, in Homs, they put a lot of cameras around the neighborhood, filming 24 hours on 24. And this for watching, for controlling actually, what the regime would do. In the night, how they would arrest people, for example. So we got a record, a huge record actually, about how they arrest people during the night. And when it came to streaming, it was a new level on...
Streaming?
Streaming. Streaming is...
The video was live. It was not uploaded after the demonstration. It was during the demonstration that people were seeing it. And we got a lot of help from big news channels like Al Jazeera, who started sharing these videos live. Yes, and by that time there were a lot of neighborhoods, in Homs for example, that were totally liberated of regime presence. They were only people, and they were organizing within themselves food. So it became freer for people. It was safer to...
How did they chase the police from these neighborhoods in Homs?
How did they take them out? With a little bit of violence, with locals who have Kalashnikovs, something like this. They helped these people, but the main power was the people. When we're talking about Homs, about the neighborhood, for example, Baba Amro or Kaladia, all the people there were going to the street, so we've got thousands in the street, 10,000 actually. They occupied the whole city. So the regime was thinking about how it would manage this situation. So the regime left, but not for long actually. This area didn't remain liberated for a long time. We're talking about the civil era.
Yes, it was for weeks, but then the regime would come back.
Come back with the army, not the police.
And you were saying people were organizing food and so on and so on. Can you explain how this was done?
It was based on, actually, the economy. We had a kind of local economy in each city, so all classes in Homs, for example, they were in solidarity with each other. The rich people did a good job during this period of time. They were giving free food to people during these days.
They kind of collectivized at some point the food, and they divided it within each other. But also because these neighborhoods were liberated, but at the same time, they were surrounded by the army. So they were blocked from... There was sort of a siege around each neighborhood, which didn't have any regime presence anymore. So they would organize patrols of people that would leave at night to go and get food and come back. And I know this because I have a lot of friends who were at Homs during that period. Even people who left from cities like Aleppo, they went there. They would tell me stories about how they would take advantage of the army sleeping or doing other things. And they would go to other places in the city and they would bring stuff and come back.
And a lot of, for example, in Aleppo, there was nothing happening. It was a little bit of a quiet city, but there were a lot of people who supported the revolution. They couldn't do anything in Aleppo, but they did a lot of support by food and money sent to Daraa, sent to Homs. But this way doesn't help us on the long term. You know, it was sort of a short-term solution. It built a kind of bond between cities. Before the revolution, we had a lot of problems between cities.
When we're talking about this time period in July, really the biggest thing that happened, which shocked everyone, was Hama, because this was the city where the biggest massacre in the history of Syria took place, and where 40,000 people were killed in the 80s. But they made a demo in July, and a lot of people were killed. So then the Mahafer, the mayor of the city, he sympathized with the revolution, and so he ordered everyone from the army that was in the city not to fire at demonstrations.
To go out of the city.
Yes, he kicked them out. And so the next Friday, like 800,000 people were in the demonstration.
Who did he kick out? The army?
Yes, all of the regime officials from the city. There was only the mayor and the civilians of the city. And I think that almost everyone, the children, the old people, everyone really participated in this huge demo, and it was on TV. It was the first liberated city of Syria, let's say. And so, at that time, it was mostly only on Friday that large amounts of people would go out into the streets, but then they started having demos every day. You know these huge carnivals, you would say, where someone would stand up and sing and everyone would dance, and it was amazing. And people started coming from other cities, like from Aleppo, where they couldn't demonstrate in their cities, so they would go there. And the thing is, although Hama is a bit religious, there were a lot of people from different sects and women without veil, and they were welcomed. So I think it was the utopia of the Syrian Revolution, because everything good about the revolution was there in that square. It was a huge square.
Yes, I still remember in that square, we met two guys, and one of them was saying, I am from Hama. I'm not radical, and I'm not a real Muslim, actually. We are now in Ramadan, and I'm smoking, and you saw me. I am not, he told me. So we've got like a stereotype saying that all people in Hama are so religious, so radical, and they talk only about God, But what happened there, I was there. I attended one of those demos. And people were in a really great situation psychologically, happy, singing. There were no problems. Actually, for sure there were some troubles here and there, but this big energy of these demos was like perfect, I can say.
2 weeks later, the mayor was invited into the house of the president, and he fired him from his job, and he put another one. He was really violent.
A soldier.
Very radical. Yes, he was a military man, and then the army, of course, stormed the city of Hama, and everything stopped.
There was a famous singer called Kashush. He created a lot of...
They were revolutionary songs, but at the same time, they were mocking the regime. They were trying to... Because it was mostly fear that was the barrier for a lot of people. So we used comedy a lot in order to just make the regime seem inferior. That we just shouldn't be scared of them, because they are mostly stupid and something like that.
So when the army occupied Hama, they take his... What's this?
They slit his throat. They killed him and they threw him in the river.
This was the end of the civil era of the revolution. This was the first sign of the end.
The beginning of the end.
After that, there was the Free Generals movement.
Yes, generals of the army. They defected from the Syrian army and they founded this thing. So it stopped being, locals defending their neighborhoods, and it became more experienced army men.
Can you explain about these locals defending their neighborhoods before we go into the military?
They declared a mission about what they had to do, the locals. They said, "We are here to protect the demonstration, not to fight the regime. We are here for protection, not for war." So it was really different from city to city. For example, when we were talking about Daraa, it was more controlled by the civilians, the demonstration power, more than the military. Because, some groups had the power, especially when we're talking about weapon power. So they would be more authorized to do and give orders. We should do this and we should do this. So with this criteria in Daraa, for example, it was more friendly between the locals that were armed and those who were not armed. In Homs, it was different. Because in Daraa, the whole society was involved in the same time. There is actually no big difference between the countryside and the city. When we are talking about the Hurani, they had this traditional bond, families and so on. And Homs was a little bit different, because in that city, we have 3 sects. Actually, 3 sects and 2 religions, Christians, Sunnis, and Alawis. So from the beginning of the revolution, there was a division.
They don't like each other.
At all.
There is a very sectarian hate between the 3.
Also, we can add to this situation that Homs had a problem between the countryside and the city. So the locals who were armed, most of them were from the countryside, and most of them were people from an area called Baba Amro. This is an area based on traditional society, which is called Bedouin.
It is a tribal society.
They trade weapons. I'm talking about the past, drugs, and they were already so violent. So they got more power with their attitude. They didn't care about values such as freedom. They have other sorts of ideas. It is not acceptable for them to accept freedom as a value. Instead of it, they would be more motivated for revenge and fight the regime. This kind of difference in the conflict is based upon which society we're talking about, because Syria is not one society at all. And with this sensitive situation, when we're talking about Homs, there are 3 religions, 3 sects, and a bad relationship between people and everyone who is involved. Who had the most power inside this struggle? 2 groups, the regime and the armed locals, who were seeking for revenge and fighting the regime. It didn't matter what happened to the city.
But to be perfectly clear, this happened across the board, because it wasn't like people organized themselves and decided to hold up arms in order to defend the neighborhoods. In a lot of cases, they were people who already had arms, and there were a lot of people who chose to stay peaceful and decided not to hold arms. So the power was divided between these 2 groups. People who had arms felt like they were more powerful because they were putting their lives in danger more than peaceful demonstrators. So they thought they should be in control. They should decide. There were a lot of conflicts between the 2. The people who kept holding on to the principles and the values that we set from the start of the revolution, which were not about revenge, which wasn't something personal with the regime, which was not something against specifically the Alawites, that as a sect were in control of the regime. It's about a better life for all the citizens, for everyone in this country. So there was this conflict between these two, and in the end, I think when civil demonstrators weren't going anywhere, I think they felt they were stuck. These people were allowed, or had even more power in order to set the course for the rest of the revolution. They said, well, if peaceful isn't working, we should go to arms. And so the people who had different values, who were leaning more towards revenge, who didn't really take part in the revolution from the beginning, but who joined afterward when they were fueled by hate and not by... They were not really revolutionary. They had personal matters with the regime that they needed to sort out, something like this. So they took over from there, I think.
They were all like this, the people taking up arms?
No, of course not.
I mentioned Daraa. We didn't have this kind of situation in Daraa.
And other places.
We're talking generally, actually. It's not the truth that Daraa represents the revolution's values and Homs doesn't. No, but the situation there was more balanced between a lot of powers, a lot of sources of values, of...
Yes, and of course, because the regime knows about hate between, or conflicts between different sects, different religions and cities where you have different religious groups like Homs, they try to play on this. They try to play this card, because at the beginning there was everyone. It wasn't homogenous like after. The demonstration wasn't from a specific sect. It was everyone coming together. But afterward, when violence was targeted towards a specific group, when they took Sunni prisoners and they tortured them while they were more indulgent with other sects or religious groups, they tried to fuel hate in between them, to try to turn them against each other.
And officially, actually, also, the consultant of the president showed up at the media and she said, "Here in Syria, we have a lot of sects, religions. All people live together in peace, and if this will still happen, this situation will be in danger. And we can remember stories from the history of how Sunnis killed Alawis." She mentioned a lot of stories about when the regime had no power, no control. The people were going to eat, to fight each other, to kill each other. So it was kind of a warning. They warned us that this would happen. And about this, I have justified information from Homs at that time. They killed Alawites, opposition Alawite people, young and politicals, politicians, and they made stories about how it was Salafis and jihadis and terrorists who had killed them, but actually the secret police had killed them, and for 2 months, they played this game, and the city already
There was tension to begin with between themselves. It was easier for people to believe these stories than in other places.
You've got the radical religious people from both sides. They proved these stories. They justified these stories. This is real. This is who we are. We hate each other.
And the thing is, they bombed a school in an Alawite's neighborhood, a children's school, and people started saying it was the regime who would benefit from this, that no one would benefit except for the regime from hate between people, turning people against each other. But people would really believe these stories because they'd say, why would the regime do this? He belongs to the same sect, so why would he kill his own people?
It is like an everyday question. Why would the regime do this?
Yes, but it is true, because he tried to commit such atrocities that it would be impossible or unbelievable that people would they couldn't believe that the regime would do this. He tried to go to extremes in order to make it. So, what do you think? What should we talk about now?
We could talk about the military defecting. You have the feeling that all things that were happening, how the things were evolving, there was something in your hands still at that moment, or was it slipping out of your hands?
Yes, I think so. But at that time we went into reaction. We weren't acting. We were just reacting to what the regime was doing. We lost a lot of the power we had. We lost a lot of the control we had. Because as time progresses, people start losing the enthusiasm, losing the energy they had at the beginning of the revolution. And they were seeing that a lot of lives had been lost, and a lot of blood has been shed, and nothing seemed to change. The regime seemed very determined to to continue with the policy it had, and I think maybe more people were beginning to sympathize with the revolution, and we were becoming more, but at the same time, there were a lot of people who were leaving. So everything was becoming chaotic at that point. We didn't know what to do. And the two main cities, Aleppo and Damascus, seemed too hard. I mean, I was there, and I remember I blamed a lot the people of my city that they weren't doing anything, because there were only small demonstrations taking place. But the regime was more violent with these cities, because it was too afraid that something would happen there, because it could lose a lot of support, especially with Damascus being the capital, of course, and Aleppo being a very industrialized city with a lot of investments and interests. So if it lost this city, the economy would be destroyed. And this is what happened, actually. So what he did was the tribes that are known to be very loyal, that were mostly drug traffickers, they were deployed. They weren't, what do you call them? Shabia, we could say. Shabia is, they are not officially with the regime, but they are paid in order to.
They call it paid thugs in English.
So it was crazy. They had knives and long, bats. And they would go, and it was, but.
At that time, we started demos inside of the university, and we faced this group of people, which was mentioned. It was the start of a student movement, and it was so amazing because there were a lot of backgrounds from a lot of different cities inside the campus. What happened, we took 1 month struggling. We made a lot of progress with each other if we were talking about a space coordination. We had a solution for how we could communicate between each other, even if we were so different, even if we have different backgrounds, different views about what is this revolution, what is the future of this revolution. We escaped from this struggle between each other. After that, I don't know why the regime was a little bit tolerant with us at the beginning. I think not to make a lot of trouble inside the university. This is the university. It's students in a big city. And all was so quiet except for this area. So at the beginning, we faced the police, official police. They used against us gas, fake bullets. And it was amazing for us, this kind of condition. Oh, we have gas now. We are humans, not... But after that, they sent Shabia, and it was a bloody night. Nobody killed, but a lot of students had injuries. Dangerous situation. After that, they escalate to violence. It's not a kind of bomb. It's a kind of bomb. They throw it inside of a building, and it was a crazy night. The end of this struggle inside the campus.
You were staying the night in the campus as well? You slept there?
I slept at my cousin's room, Akil. We were me and Akil.
But the students are living there, or was it an occupation of the university?
No, we were sleeping there. We have rooms, we have beds. We call it the University City.
Because the thing is that it started really early, actually. It was the only movement that was going on in Aleppo. Because at the University City, of course, there are a lot of people who came from other cities, which witnessed a lot of demonstrations. They came from Homs and from Daraa. And first of all, they were infuriated because the people of Aleppo weren't doing anything to stand in solidarity with their city. But at the same time, they wanted to do something so everyone got there together. And it was
fun.
But what was going on? You were doing demos in the campus?
Yes, it's kind of a lot of buildings. It's like a neighborhood, we could say. There are a lot of streets inside the city without cars. So we don't occupy it with, just at night, 6 hours each day, so we have bottles for the police.
Yes, you threw rocks and...
We threw Molotovs, rocks, and we were playing, actually. We had a lot of fun, and it was like...
But you were not going to classes? There were no classes going on anymore?
No, at night there were no classes.
Ah, this was at the night, okay.
Yes, at the night, because in the evening, the city was surrounded by police, blocked. There were a lot of parties, groups... the Baath party groups, inside the city. They checked a lot of identities. You are from here, from there. They controlled during the evening. But at night, there was not a lot of light, so we could hide there and we could run, etc.
And so what did you want to tell about these bombs?
At the last day in the university, actually, they bombed a building with BMB.
Oh, yeah, the smaller tanks, not the big ones.
They are called BMB.
It is a medium-sized tank.
Yes, There was a student thrown from the roof, 2 students actually. One of them thrown off by the secret police, and the other one was thrown off by the students. He was a student, but he was cooperating with the secret police. He was also an Alawite. So they throw him from the roof, and the regime used this story to bomb the building, to attack and throw students from the building. Like 20 or 30 students got thrown from the roof, or people just escaping from the police and they throw themselves from the building. So this last day was a disaster, and everybody after, we couldn't do anything because the university was shut down, so everyone should travel to their cities.
They closed the university?
No, it was the end of the second semester.
But I didn't understand. They threw bombs in the building?
It's a kind of small bomb. It makes gas, but it damaged 1 floor of this building. It made some damage, like whole rooms were destroyed.
And this was the same night they threw all the students from the building?
The last day was the most violent day. Yes, they threw students from the windows and arrested a lot of us. They used white weapons, etc. But before this day, there was also a familiar violence which happened during the strike. I could say the struggle lasted for 4 weeks. The government was tolerant with us just for 3 or 4 days, and after that they changed the chief of police and started with a new strategy. What happened during this struggle, during the last week, we were losing our bond. Students seemed more violent, no communication. They just regrouped. We are from Idlib, for example, from this city.
Because of what the regime was doing, the people were...
Yes, because of the news we received. It was so violent about what had happened in Idlib, what happened in Homs, what happened in... So people started shouting to each other, "You don't do enough in your city," like this. And of course, if someone from another sect, if someone is not Sunni, or especially if someone is Alawi, they will never talk to him, or they were trying to protect themselves from him. Also, there were reasons for this. Because what happened also, we got an Alawist group working with the secret police, armed with weapons, making patrols during the night. So everything we were working on, the bond, the values, no matter what was the background, collapsed. And it was such a huge loss. This is the end.
So you see, all the civil movements, all the revolutionary movements that were created at the beginning of the revolution were being destroyed at the same time period. You could say in different cities, in the university, which was very important also. So yes, people started becoming more hesitant, asking themselves if this was the right way. Are we doing the right thing? Should we look for other means of fighting the regime? This is where we started thinking of an armed struggle, and not a peaceful struggle.
The revolution is going to be fucked. Defend your revolution.
طلعوا يهتفوا له شافوا البواريد يمه قالوا اخوتنا هن ومش رح يضربونا سمعت هالشباب يمه الحرية عالباب يمه.
Second part.
Earlier demands of the revolution. In the case of Daraa, for example, one of the problems was that, following an international environmental agreement,